Warning, this podcast has stories of real-life events and true crime that happens every day. These stories may contain adult language and graphic or disturbing details not suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
132 in Bush, I've got him at gunpoint. Check your left phone for going to full evacuation at this time. They're pulling them out.
1011. Advise ready for escape.
Gun!
Welcome to another episode of War Stories. I'm Tom.
And I'm Chuck.
And things are going well. We've got the show. I think our producers got us clicking along. We are ahead of the game. So some of our banter when we intro these episodes, we have to change it because usually it was topical, and now these episodes are coming out like in advance. So I hope you had a pleasant Thanksgiving, Chuck. And
yeah, it's crazy. Thanksgiving was, I think, good. And I don't think any of us were sick, but I guess time will tell.
Yeah, I heard I hear that the discussion that just happened that hasn't happened yet around the table about politics at my Thanksgiving is going to be lit this year. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh yeah,
and I also
one of my favorite people to antagonize, I guess you could say, around the holidays with politics, just because I think it's fun. She's not going to be there this year, so
you lost all your fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, I get to still kind of antagonize my mother-in-law. I mean, she's right-leaning, but I can still mess with her because I like to play devil's advocate, and I go both sides, so it'll still be fun.
I got a friend
work a little harder.
who has a terminally ill family member, and this is how you can talk about cops and dark humor, right? We talked about that. We talked about veterans and dark humor, right? It's like food in North Korea. Not everybody gets it. But my humor is so dark. I was texting another cop the other day, and he's got a family member who's terminally ill, right?
Oh,
and it's the cancer's really bad. And it's terrible. And I would never say this to him if he wasn't one of my closest friends. He said, yeah, we have this family member, and we're I'm supposed to be nice because he's terminally ill and he's really upset about the election results. And I said, well, just remind him he's probably not going to be around for all 4 years.
Oh, man.
He goes, he sends me the laugh react, and I said, was that too dark? He goes, it's never too dark for me. I just can't ever say that to anybody else in my family because I think that's funny.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, it helps give the levity to the situation. It's a shitty situation. No one wants to ever be in it, but I mean, it makes you laugh.
Yeah.
Did its job.
Yeah, it did its job. And I get it. I can't be that dark with most people, but I think I can be that dark with our guest. Although I tend to usually shy away from dark humor with people I don't know. I'm guessing based on our guest's bio that he has had his fair share of dark humor that he has used and has been used on him. So why don't you tell us about our guest, who is a doctor, but that's not where he gets his dark humor from.
It's Dr. Paul Taylor, PhD, law enforcement consultant instructor out of Denver, Colorado. He's a law enforcement research, human factors, and systems safety. He's a training consultant, and he is also the podcast host of New View Police Podcast.
All right. Nice. Well, Dr. Taylor, do you go by Doc? Do you go by Paul? Do you go by Doc Taylor?
I go by Paul. My dad was a real doctor. You guys don't want me treating anything, I promise.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, not at all. But yeah, thank you for having me. And Tom, dark humor is definitely on the table. I appreciate it.
Good. I can my entire existence, my verbal communication skills are like 60% dark humor, 20% sarcasm, and 20% movie quotes. It's probably about my entire ability to communicate. Well, no, there's a percentage, and then there's threatening people genuinely, but it's like 1% where you like genuinely threaten people with bodily harm, and they believe you.
Yeah. I'm fluent in 3 of those. I'll let you guess which 3.
So you have your PhD. Now, we've never met. we've met for the first time today. I want you to weigh in on this topic because I've heard it brought up. Do you think that there should be a different doctor term for the different styles of doctorates, or do you think it's fine to have just the regular doctor and then make everybody specify which kind of doctor they are?
I think it's fine. You can never say that you're a doctor when you board an aircraft, right? Like don't use that if you're just a PhD, and don't use both, right? It's never Dr. Paul Taylor PhD, and there are people out there that do that. It's one or the other. You got to pick it, and then go with that. But yeah, don't do
that. Was my fault then.
No, you're good. You're good, Jeff.
Right, Paul Taylor PhD or Dr. Paul Taylor, right?
Yeah, it's got to be one or the other, but just Paul. Just Paul is fine. Thank you.
Right. Although I think that you've earned the alphabets after your name, right?
The only people who have to refer to me as doctor are attorneys when I'm on the stand. That's it. Everybody else can call me Paul Taylor.
Perfect. We'll call you Paul Taylor. Now you started out your career in law enforcement, right?
Yeah. I started in the military.
Even further back. Yeah.
Classic American male story. I was underachieving in school. I was really struggling in school. I was living in small. What's that? I ended up joining the Navy. But I.
So you were Chuck's daddy.
Yeah. Were you in the Navy?
More like taxi, but yeah.
Yeah. Gave you a ride once in a while. That's good.
Yeah.
No, I was struggling in high school, small town, walked into a Navy recruiter's office and I said, get me out of my town. And ended up being a military cop. I liked it, got to the end of my 4 years. And I thought, you know what, I'll apply to police departments. And so
it should be like a Bruce Springsteen song from the late 70s, like small town boy wants to get out of it, joins the Navy. Like there's that good Americana to it, right?
Definitely the making of a country song there for sure.
John Cougar Mellencamp, maybe. I'm not sure who.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So you did you enjoy the Navy? Did you go
anywhere? That was peacetime Navy, right? So it was prior to 9/11.
Clinton's Navy.
So yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Guarded Clinton's aircraft for a while when he was going overseas. Spent most of my time in naval.
Yeah, our co-host Matt was in Clinton's Navy, so he never went anywhere either.
Yeah. I was in Italy. I spent my whole 2 years in Naples.
Nice.
It was great. Yeah. For a 19-year-old kid, I had an apartment on the Med, all granite countertop.
Geez.
I mean, it was beautiful, and I was the only.
What was that like?
Oh, it was amazing. It was amazing.
How many?
You didn't even have to ask. He said he had an apartment on the Med with granite countertops, and he's 19 and he's in the Navy, bro. Like,
only single guy in that whole apartment complex. When you're in Italy, you live with your parents until you get a job. So all the women in that apartment complex would make me dinner every night. I would have Italian food at my doorstep when I got home every evening. It was the most beautiful life.
Why did you come home?
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. So then you do your time in the Navy, and lots of people make the jump. Like I always joke, I'm like, you either get out of the military and join the police department, or get out of the military and go to prison, right? So how did you end up going to the police department?
Yeah, so as a Midwest kid, right, and I ended up in San Diego, California with the Navy when I got out, and so I started applying to local agencies, and the first people that picked me up was Riverside County Sheriff's Department.
That's a nice place.
Yeah, awesome place for a Midwest kid with zero exposure in the middle of the biker wars that was going on during that time frame. So I finished up the academy. I graduated at the top of my class, and hit the street right off the bat, and worked for about 2 years. And my dad got a terminal diagnosis, and I made the decision. It was tough at the time to leave and go take care of my dad. I thought my life was over, man, because I loved being a cop, loved working as a cop. But decided, you know what, my dad needs me to be home right now, and so I left. And looking back on it, probably one of the better decisions I've ever made in my life. Having the opportunity to take care of my dad the last years of his life. I'd recommend it to anybody that gets the opportunity, just because you get to see where you came from, and then you get to see where you're going. And being there for my dad was important for me. I started going back to school when I got out. Just touch and go. Went to a community college for a little while. Worked as a security guard. It's the only job I could find. I had a high school diploma, and so working as a security guard, taking care of my dad. And then when my dad passed away, I had met my wife. I made the decision to move out to Colorado, and I started looking for law enforcement jobs again. And this was now 2008, and nobody was hiring. Middle of the recession, right?
Yeah.
It was law enforcement was completely locked down, and the only job I could get was with the university police department. I was like, oh man, I'm gonna go.
That's a good gig though.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's a good
it's a good gig, but it's usually a retirement gig. And if you just got done at Riverside County Sheriff and you're looking to hook and book, university is not
excited. Not excited.
I knew guys that they specifically went to a university police department in the last 4 or 5 years of their career because their kids could get free college because they were an employee. And so they would work at the university to finish out their Percy retirement and get their kids a free college degree. And then as soon as their kid was out of college, they pulled the pin and retired. That's what a lot of people do on university police departments. So I totally understand. You got to take the gig because it's a cop job.
Yep.
But at the same time,
it was a cop job. And I will say this, if you can police on a university campus, especially a liberal university campus like the University of Colorado, Boulder, you can police anywhere. Because the pressures that you get and the scrutiny that those officers get is unreal. So
because you report to an entirely different group. Like it people don't understand. It works very different. Like a municipal police department working for the city is very different from a county sheriff, right? Yeah. Especially because the county sheriff is elected and the chief of police is ostensibly hired, right?
100%.
Right.
But then you go to a university or a school police department where your boss is the board of education, or in your case, the board of directors.
Yeah.
Right. And then ostensibly the chancellor of the university or the dean or the president of the university. I don't know what University of Denver has.
Yeah.
But that's the guy who's in charge. And then the chief of police works for essentially a school administrator.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's conflicting stuff, right? The university doesn't want crime to go up.
Right.
So they're putting pressure on low reporting. And then you got a bunch of cops who are trying to go out and be cops. We're fortunate because we had a dual commission with the city. So there are opportunities with the city of Boulder that probably most university police departments don't get. And it, it was a good experience.
Like task force?
They had drug task force. You could be on the SWAT team. We're fortunate in that we could make stops and our commission carried us. We could poach right in the city, and it was still at a time frame.
Okay.
There's still a time frame where you could make pretext stops and find some dope and stuff like that. And it was fun. I mean, it was fun.
Yeah. You made the best of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I moved out quick. I actually made sergeant within 3 years there, which is too fast, but I had some prior experience, and so they moved me up.
Your prior experience, cream rises to the top, and sometimes university police departments are made up of the other kind of people that are people that maybe can't get onto a bigger agency.
Absolutely.
Which is, and I'm not saying it's the case with most or all or any, but I'm saying it does happen, right? You have guys that are more suited for a university police department than maybe a bigger agency out on the street. Now, let me ask you this, because it sounds like you're in a catch-22, because if it's a crime, right, a genuine crime, the school is not inclined to want people to know that crimes are being committed on their campus. And so their inclination is to keep it quiet, right? I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I am not accusing any school in any case of covering up criminal acts, although it has happened.
Sure.
What I'm talking about is the amount of pressure from a school to keep things under wraps to preserve the image of the school. And then you cut to the flip side where they also don't want to ruin the college environment. So if it's not really a big deal, they don't want you to do anything at all. So there's this, it seems to be there's only a sweet spot where the crime is just big enough for them to want you to enforce it, but not so big that it makes like a splash in the media.
Let's not dig too deep. With there's a Clary Act, right? And so campuses are mandated to report specific types of crime. And that report goes out every year, and parents read that, and so absolutely, recruiting is affected by that, and student choices are affected by that. So there's all of that, and then you have the political dynamic, right? You have people on campus who certainly don't want police officers on campus, and so you deal with all of that, and a lot of high-profile events, right? So we have a big football team, or it's not a big football team, but we have a football team, had presidential visits, so a lot of high profile type events where you're dealing with stuff that you don't necessarily deal with as an everyday patrol officer in a large metropolitan agency.
I assume, I was always told, if you do a vice gig, like a vice stint, and you come out unscathed, you can pretty much write your ticket and go anywhere because everyone knows you're pretty solid. And I would assume that working on a very political campus, or any campus is really going to be political, and there's a lot of things you need to tiptoe around and not make a big splash in the news. If you can handle yourself according, and you decide to go out to another agency, you're probably going to be picked up pretty quick because they see that, and especially if they see, okay, he's a supervisor and he's able to hook and book there and not get in trouble and not make waves. He's probably going to be pretty solid over here. So I assume it's probably the pretty same.
There's probably a spectrum there, right? So yes, to some degree, but you also have people that can hide on a campus and not be very proactive, not do a lot of work, and they're going to kind of rise to the top as well because that's what the campus wants. So it really depends on what you're looking for as an agency. I think certainly you can get some pretty politically astute people that work within that environment and probably would thrive in some of the major cities, particularly in today's climate, right?
Oh, got it. Was it while you were working for the university? Did you attend the same university and get your doctorate?
I didn't. So I moved up to sergeant, and then became, after some time on the street as a sergeant, which, by the way, best job in law enforcement. If I could go back and work again, I wouldn't want to rise above the rank of sergeant. And it's just a fantastic job. The opportunity to work with your people, to have your own team that you get to kind of cultivate and lead and actually make a difference in their lives within your organization. I love it. But I moved up to training manager for my department. And it's when I was working as a training manager for my department that I was kind of first introduced to human factors in some research and some study that I was doing. And I got to tell you, I got angry. I was mad because the more I studied about how people make decisions, about how other professions have kind of looked at outcomes and improved based on outcomes, I got mad because nobody had talked to me or taught me about those things. And it was my responsibility to train officers to go out and make decisions in the chaos and the complexity of police work. And one of the questions I started to ask is, how does our profession learn? So when something bad happens across the country, or there's we only say bad, let's say a controversial event across the country happens.
Watershed event.
Yeah. It's going to change the profession. We're going to change policy. We're going to change legislation. We're going to
Rodney King, North Hollywood shootout, George Floyd, Freddie Gray.
Big time George Floyd.
As a profession, how do we learn? How do we learn about
steps on their dick?
What's that?
Somebody steps on their dick, right? Like literally, somebody screws the pooch. Somebody makes a bad decision. Somebody a situation goes sideways. It makes the paper.
Yep.
And then everybody goes, and I've heard it recently said, I love this. Every action is in and of itself an overreaction, right? If it's a reaction, it's an overreaction because it inherently will be, and because you have to eventually correct back to the middle.
But
so that's how we learn.
What are we correcting off of? So when I sit there and I'm a training manager for a department, and it's my responsibility to train officers to go out and make decisions, and something happens, right? Tamir Rice, George Floyd, something happens across the country.
Right. Sure.
How do I learn what it is I should be teaching my officers from that event?
And I've always argued you can't learn anything to teach anybody until you see a much greater timeline. You have to see its effects and the unintended consequences down the road, but they expect you to train on it a week later.
Based on
Yep.
For George Floyd, I can answer that one.
Based on YouTube videos.
Yes, based on YouTube videos.
I'm going to sit down. I'm going to, just like the public, and I'm going to watch a YouTube video, and I'm going to try and divine from that YouTube video what I should be training my officers to do. And that's based on my limited training and experience. And I don't care who you are, your training experience is limited. And we're going to look at a video and through our own biased lens, we're going to try and make a decision about how to train officers. And that's how our profession improves.
It's hard. That's incredibly hard to do as well.
It's not a recent phenomenon. I know that, right? But it is one that's, I think, gotten worse because of instant media, right? You go back in the day, right? You had anybody familiar with the Onion Field book? It was a famous episode that occurred in the history of LAPD. Two cops were shot, or one cop was shot and killed. The other one, they're both taken hostage. One was shot and killed in an onion field. Okay. The way they taught, to your point, Paul, they took the other officer who was kidnapped and gave up his gun and allowed them both to be taken, and subsequently survived his partner being shot right in front of him and escaping in the dark of night, going through a harrowing experience. They rewarded him by making him go to every roll call training and tell everybody, don't do what I did.
Right.
I screwed up.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And so that sort of, they didn't even see the unintended consequences of what they were doing to the poor victim officer. And they were already telling people, what we learned from this is don't ever give up your gun. Right.
Yeah.
But the effects of that officer going and talking to all those different roll calls and that finally infecting its way into the department took a longer time. Now, Paul, you're dealing with instant gratification. It's on the news, it's on social media, it's a police fight or shooting or something that's viral within 24 to 48 hours. And as soon as it hits police one, your department's like, hey, we need to make sure this doesn't happen to us.
Yeah.
Right. And with the whole George Floyd thing, I mean, looking at it now, it's a little bit different than looking at it right when it happened, right? Because you have little to no information. You don't know much about the agency's policies, but when you look at the agency's policies in a different lens, kind of a month or 2 months or 6 months down the road, I would even say as far as that first month, you could probably figure out that there were some things wrong. Like, how come you didn't call a rescue ambulance?
Sure.
How come you didn't get that shit rolling right off the bat? Why didn't you place this person in a position of recovery? Things like that. And I guess you could learn from that kind of off the bat if you're really looking into it and looking into it deep, and just kind of see, all right, well, what did I see him do wrong if I was looking at it with my agency, right? Yeah. How can I better my agency if I was able to look at it through my agency's lens? And then you can kind of go off of that. But I think it's very difficult to
it's difficult to do that alone.
Do all that.
But Paul, you're talking about, you don't even get the tactical debrief with everybody's perspective. You get the body camera handed to you by your agency and they say, fix it.
Well, or the YouTube video that we don't even know if it's been edited. We don't know where that's come from, and you're trying to guess. And in George Floyd, it's a great example. We're guessing, and that, I mean, we don't know why Derek Chauvin did what it is that he did, and how many investigations has that gone through? And the only thing we've actually learned from that, I would submit to you, is that Derek Chauvin's going to spend a long time in prison, if not the rest of his life. That's all we learned. And as a profession, like,
to this day, I still don't know I still have questions as a cop. And I don't know that I would have convicted, if I was on the jury, I don't know that I would have convicted Chauvin, because I feel like there's a bunch of question marks that are obfuscated by the narrative, right? The narrative that Derek Chauvin, kept his knee on this dude's neck for 8.5 minutes and strangled him to death, which we know is not true.
Well, and we've got a video, right?
Right.
The public can look at that and put any motivation they want behind that.
Sure.
The media certainly looks at it and puts motivation behind it.
Right.
You and I can look at it and we can put motivation behind it, but we don't know. And the point is that changed our whole profession. It tore at the very fabric of our society, and we don't actually know how we should be improving from that. And I was working as a training manager, and I became pretty dissatisfied with that. That's not the way we should be learning as a profession, right? You look at other high-risk professions like medicine and aviation and oil and gas, they don't learn that way. And in fact, medicine actually takes a lot of pride in pointing out errors and learning from errors, and the doctors will come forward and bring forward errors. But we've created a structure with law enforcement, not we, but society and law enforcement as a whole has created structures that actually don't allow us to learn. People scream for accountability, but we don't give officers the ability to give account. We've created structures that don't allow them to tell us why they did what it is that they did, because it's so liability focused and so culpability focused that we're not able to learn from what happens to improve the safety for officers or the communities that they serve. So it's really an unfortunate situation. I became really dissatisfied with it when I was specifically when I was working as a training manager for the department.
Oh, I bet. So is that how you got into deciding you wanted to get your doctorate?
That was part of it. So I actually completely revamped our training program, completely revamped our field training program. I started working with some national companies. I worked some with Force Science. I was working with Caliber Press and starting to present and stuff. And then we got a new chief. She came from a large West Coast metropolitan agency that rhymes with LAPD. And she came in and made the decision that she was just going to do away with the training program. She took us back to minimum standards. I got super frustrated. I went home to my wife and I said, you know what? I can't make the change I want to make inside this agency. I think I want to go pursue my PhD. God bless her. I know she regrets it now, but she said, okay. And packed up the family, moved across the country to New York. And I got my PhD at the University of Albany, State University of New York. And then started teaching with Force Science. I traveled around the country. I taught for their main certification class. I taught a section on decision making and human error. I started working with their advanced course, and then I got a job with the University of Colorado, Denver. Started doing research. I did research on dispatch priming, the impact of pre-event information on kind of split-second decision making. Muzzle position, where an officer holds their muzzle and how that impacts perception response time, but also how it impacts decision making. So depending on what they produce, there's kind of a debate among the tactical guys at the time when I was working, as you know, where should we be holding our muzzle when you're clearing a room? Right. If you're all the way up, are you missing information? If you're all the way down, how long does it take you to respond? So kind of resolve some of that stuff with the paper I did. I've looked at like transitioning between tools, so moving from taser to firearm, the impact on time, but also the impact on decision making. So one of the things we know from like sports is when you start paying attention to your tools, it impacts your decision making, it impacts your performance, and that's what we found in the study, and done a number of other studies along those lines. And so yeah.
Wow. So you got into the why very deeply.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as a defensive tactics instructor for my department, the why has always fascinated me in the sense that, well, the why has always fascinated me from the profiling sense, right? But as a DT instructor, what I found was this world where the why and the how married. In when I was taught to be a defensive tactics instructor, they taught us to break down into patterns of altercation, right? But then when I looked into patterns of altercation, I started to realize that all those patterns of altercation are based on the decision-making process that led you up to how you got into that pattern, right? Yeah. And so learning to read people, right, becomes its own use of force, like its own level on the continuum. And it's not a use of force, but learning to read people is a skill that if you can do it, you can put yourself in a position and say things and make decisions that, I mean, you can literally talk somebody into handcuffs.
Yeah.
With and not
verbal
fight
judo.
But sometimes it's a threat. Sometimes it's a very clear and concise threat that is and this is why I said 1% of me is threat, right?
Yeah.
It's a very clear and concise articulated threat of, listen, this is what is going to happen to you if you don't follow my clear instructions.
Yeah.
And the reality of somebody saying that to you in a very cold, unemotional way is a decision-making process, as opposed to, what the fuck is going on? You know?
It's a little bit scarier too if you're on the opposite end and you have someone who's knowing we're about to get into a fight if you don't go along with the program, and they're telling you, I'm going to do this, and they're completely stone-faced, just stoic, and they're just zero emotion. That's kind of like for a lot of, because I use that exact tactic at work, and it works most of the time. And then the times it doesn't work, the guys are apologizing you at the end, and they're like, "Yeah, my bad, dude. Like, I'm sorry." And you're like, "Yeah, well, see, this is what happens. And that's after a while they come down because they're motherfucking you right off of the bat when you hook them up, and they're all, twisted up in a fucking pretzel, But that's very, to me, when you have someone who's super calm, you're like, shit, they may have done this before and they're very confident in their abilities. Maybe I won't do that. And a lot of the times it works.
Yeah, it's amazing to me in kind of my empirical experience with officers is you have officers that never get into fights, never get into foot pursuits. You have other officers that always get into fights and always get into foot pursuits. And I almost think of it as a category, right? So you have people who have, and I hate the term emotional intelligence, but they're able to read the human landscape, right? They're able to read people and they know what's coming. And then you have people on the low end of the spectrum. So you look at that as a spectrum. And then you have people who are proactive and willing to engage, and people who are not proactive and not willing to engage. And if you think of that as like a crosshairs, if you have somebody who has high emotional intelligence, able to read the human landscape, and they're very confident in their abilities, right? You're going to have that proactive cop who's a professional out there on the street doing a great job. If you have that person who is able to read the human landscape, but they're avoidance, they're not confident in their abilities.
Profiler.
Those are your supervisors. Those are the people who will promote very quickly in the organization.
That's true.
Right? Because they don't feel confident in their abilities, but they can read the human landscape. And so they're going to be great at the politics inside the department. Right. If you have the guy, all right, that not able to read the human landscape, but highly confident in his abilities, that's the guy. He got surprised by the last guy who punched him in the face, and that's never going to happen to him again. He's going to rely on his skill set to stop that. So that's the guy, stay down on the fucking curve. He's going to grab the guy. He's going to throw him down. He's going to go hands-on much sooner, getting in fights all the time, getting in chases all the time. Still proactive, but can't read people. So they rely on their physical abilities. And then you got the person low proactivity or low human landscape, low confidence. They disappear either in field training or they disappear within two years because they're hiding. They can't figure out the department. They can't become chief. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I was gonna say they come back a captain or they end up being your chief. You're like, I remember that guy. He sucked.
Slide through the cracks.
They go to the academy. Yeah.
The crazy thing is,
this profession does weed itself out in a lot of ways, especially. And that's I'm always been a big proponent of stress academies and a certain level of hazing and a certain level of structure and formality to your FTO process.
It weeds people out.
And
it's got to be hard, right? Like make it hard. Training's got to be hard, but it doesn't have to be. Like stress inoculation is a little bit of a myth. Like you only get inoculated to the stress that's actually coming from the factor, right? So I can't make someone less afraid of spiders by yelling at them, right? It'll never happen. They'll still be afraid of spiders. I can make them less afraid of spiders by exposing them to spiders in a positive context. And that can happen, right? And one of the best examples of this, I have a good friend who was a Navy SEAL, right? Went through way more training and hazing and stress inoculation than any cop is ever going to go to. And he describes his first moments in combat, right? And he's like, it was pure chaos. I had no idea what was happening. I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing, right? My stress levels were through the roof. How do you actually get used to that? By exposure to combat, right? And spending time in combat. And pretty soon he's able to make decisions in that environment. And so that's what you have to have is exposure. And we don't get that early enough. And we rely on kind of these myths for stress inoculation that don't translate over to actual performance on the street.
Okay, I am so happy to be talking to Dr. Paul Taylor on this episode, Chuck, because I feel like this is a palate cleanser, a sherbet, if you will, or a sorbet after last week's episode with...
Oh, my gosh. I already know where you're going, bud. I already know where you're going. Yeah.
We had somebody on, and again, they purported themselves to be all the things, right? Everybody's the best cop in the world. Just ask him. And he came on our show, and we did not know much about his training, website or whatever. In fact, we are not sure how he got on the show because the bio. No, I'm not kidding you. The bio that we read was not his bio.
It was different. It was not the same.
It was not the same person.
Catfished.
Right? We were not sure. Yeah, potentially catfished.
Was he good looking at least?
No, I wasn't.
No.
Oh man!
But
you guys got double catfish.
As we got into his philosophies on training and his, kind of style, I guess, is the only way. Like, he strikes me as the kind of person you're talking about, where he's very, very proactive, but low on reading things. Right. And
they'll get into a lot of shit, but can't read the situation.
He talked about like why are we training cops to understand the needle effect when pepper spray shoots out of the canister, and how many pounds of pressure per square inch it takes to inject itself into the human eye.
Okay.
And he said, why are we teaching that? And I said, well, you have to understand. He goes, when have you ever had to testify against that? I said, I don't have to testify against it. I've just been trained not like to consider it. Like, and it was one of the most bizarre conversations for me, because here's a man talking about exactly the opposite of what you're talking about. We're talking about arming people with the most information that has been looked at over the longer term. I argue for more in-depth training for cops.
Oh, 100%.
Knowledge is power.
And knowledge is power. And if I could just interrupt for a second, and training for failure is so important. We train for success all the time. We need to understand the limitations of our tools and tactics, that officers aren't going to correctly identify what's happening in front of them. They're going to position themselves in the wrong place, and their tool's not going to work the way they think it will. In fact, it's going to cause an effect that they weren't anticipating in the subject. Yeah. Are we able to respond to that? And I love what you were talking about earlier, Tom, about that spacing and closing the distance and compressing time. We need to engineer resilience into those responses and just do it. But I interrupted you, Tom, and I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just saying it was a nice contrast to talk to you as opposed to talking to this other guy. And I won't even say who it was.
It's very nice. It's a night and day difference.
Yeah, the only time I've ever literally almost turned the mic off and walked away from a show. But we're gonna air it. It has not aired yet. We are gonna air it. We're gonna let it. Well, no, as of now, it aired last week, I think. Anyway,
yeah, I think
we'll tell you off air who it was, and you can tell us if you knew that.
I think I listened to it before I came on. If it was the last episode, I spent.
No, it was not. It has not come out yet. It's not come out.
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say programming resiliency into officers. I think that's why a lot of agencies are making a big push to go towards FOSS systems, forced option simulations, because it allows you to get into that mindset, into that sticky situation, and where it does go wrong, because they're made to fail, right? You get put in don't shoot situations, and you end up smoking the suspect, right?
Sure.
And you get, those are so like, they're like a video game, but it's you're acting out in the video game with a weapon. And you have all these different tools that can register onto the screen, and they have blowback, and they have all this good stuff, and you're able to get, I guess, more repetitions at these critical incidences, right, before you ever get involved in one. And I think that really builds in the resiliency into the officer, and it helps them when they get involved in that, because they're allowed to make their mistakes here and know what happens when you mess up, or know what happens when you don't do this, or know what happens when you don't remember your drawing and exhibiting policy, and and things like that. Or if you don't know 100% your use of force policy for your agency, and you get put in this situation, and then they're like, why'd you do that? Explain me. And then you're like, I can't.
And a couple great points there. I like force option simulators. We got to be careful that it's one tool, but usually you're stationary. You're getting B-level actors who are trying to display intoxication or threat cues. And so we have to be a little careful with it, but great tool. And there's great application for it. I love it. But you bring up a great point in force reporting. When do we train officers to give a high level use of force report, especially for an officer involved shooting? And we don't. And so how do officers typically give statements, right? So if I run into something I've never encountered before on the street, what do I do to go write my report? Well, I go to my buddy and I say, hey, have you ever handled one of these before? And he's like, yeah, sure. Here's a template. This is how I wrote my report. And so then you start writing your report off of that. Well, you can't do that after an officer involved shooting, right? So you're going to be going in and giving a statement. And a lot of these attorneys aren't educated. A lot of them don't necessarily understand all the questions that are going to come up. In one case, I had an attorney asking me as an expert in one of these cases, hey, can you tell me the difference between a revolver and a semi-auto? And he's going to be representing an officer in a officer involved shooting and didn't know the difference between the two. And so they're uneducated, right? They don't know what to ask. And officers have never given this type of statement before, and we don't tell stories this way, right? We don't go to the level of detail when we just tell a story. We don't write reports that way. So I think you bring up a great point, Chuck, in that we really should be training people on how to give statements that clearly identify what they were looking at, why they started to use force, what they were seeing when they stopped using force, all of that kind of stuff, and getting into the details. We got to get beyond "I fear for my life," getting into what were you seeing, what were you afraid of, and we just don't. We don't do that.
I like what you're saying because, well, first of all, because I hate the South Park mentality of it's coming right for us, and then you shoot. Like that's that big, like, I was afraid for my life, boom, right? Like it's this pat statement, I like what you're talking about because for me, I was not only the instructor for the actual hands-on, right? So I liked it because to me, wristy twisty was what you were going to use 85% of the time. You're not going to use firearm. Most people are never going to even fire their firearm in anger, right? Like it's just most cops don't get into shooting,
right? 100%.
But you're going to go hands-on all the damn time, and you're going to put people on the ground, and you're going to cuff people up all day long. So I loved training that, right? I preferred training that over, let's say, being a firearms instructor.
Well, it builds that foundation. You can fall back on.
But I also was sent to a school for use of force report writing, which I then also trained. And you received kind of both when I was teaching. Because I taught what you're talking about. I told people, paint the picture, right? If their shoulders and their feet are the same distance apart, and their posture is set with their shoulder blades tucked, and their elbows are bent, and their hands are white knuckled, and they're balled up into fists, and their jaw is set, and they're staring at you intently, and they're tracking your movements. Well, yeah, I saw all of that. You just wrote fighting stance.
And that allows you to go hands-on immediately without waiting for them to strike you first, because there's nothing in the rule book that says you have to be struck first before you can utilize force. You just have to know how to articulate
that picture. If you don't articulate it, if you don't literally do a great job of that, and what happens? Well, now you're getting agencies where they're like, oh, a supervisor has to write the use of force report. Chuck and I just talked about this. I went during a time when I heard other agencies telling me, "Oh yeah, you have to have your arrest blessed," and I said, "What?" And they said, "You have to have the arrest blessed by a sergeant." And I said, "What are you talking about?" They say, "You want to hook somebody up, you detain him, then the sergeant comes out and you tell the sergeant what you've got, and then the sergeant says, 'Yeah, you're good to go. Arrest him,' and then you arrest him and you book him."
Yeah.
And I went, I would be fired at my agency if I didn't know enough to know I could make the arrest myself. If I called the sergeant over every time I needed to make an arrest to tell me that I was doing a good job, I would never have made it out of FTO, let alone off probation.
Yeah.
And yet we have agencies that are doing that now. And so the only people that can document use of force and write a use of force report are sergeants, because they're the only ones who are doing it.
Well, it's gotten crazy. So after I wrote my dispatch priming paper, it got a lot of attention. I started getting calls from the media, but I also got calls from some companies that were designing kind of new technology. And I had this company call me and they said, "We've got this new thing, right? We're going to have live stream from video going directly to supervisors' desks. And then the supervisor's going to be able to talk in your ear and tell you what decision to make in real time."
Yes.
And they said, what do you think about that? You wrote this study on priming. What do you think? I said, that is a horrible idea.
You're going to get people
killed. Can you imagine somebody with only the limited perspective of what you can see on a camera trying to make calls into somebody's ear as they're actually dealing with a live situation? And this is the type of stuff.
Hey, Bill, this is Sergeant Williams. Bill, can you confirm, is that a gun in his hand?
Yeah.
Real quick. Yeah. Just I can't make it out on camera.
It doesn't look like it to me. I think you should hold off doing anything else, right? It doesn't look like
that begs the whole thing. Like, what happens if you're seeing something they don't see? You get into an OIS, right? You dump this person, and now you have audio transmission second guessing you, telling you, don't do that, don't do that. And next thing you know, you just killed someone because of what you saw that wasn't being perceived on a freaking 2-inch screen, right? It's so bad for officer safety, and it's just it's such a bad idea, and
it's asinine. And the noise level after George Floyd got so high. I mean, some of the stuff that we had everybody coming out of the framework to try and solve policing issues,
right?
And none of them were police officers. I had a businessman approach me, and he's like, "I've got this great idea. I've got funding for it. We're pushing legislation for the George Floyd Bill of Rights." And he said, "This is what it's going to be. Whenever an officer contacts a member of the public, they're going to pull out a little card like a Miranda warning, and they're going to say, 'Sir or ma'am,' I'm not sure you can say sir or ma'am anymore, but individual, I am not permitted to brutalize you right now."
What?
George Floyd, right?
That's
Bill
what it was
of Rights.
written. How it was written?
Yeah, essentially, I'm not. You are something along the lines of, you are free not to be brutalized by a police officer, or something along those lines. You have the right not to be brutalized by a police officer. And he thought this was a great idea, right? And he's trying to push it around. And I asked him this. I said, okay, imagine you walked into the dentist's office and you sat down in a dentist's chair, and the dentist pulled out a card and started reading a card and said, "Listen, you have the right for me not to extract the wrong tooth." How long would you sit in that dentist chair after you heard something like that? You'd be gone,
right?
And why? And so, yeah, all of this noise. Like after George Floyd, everybody had an idea about how to solve policing issues, about how to improve policing, and nobody sat down to actually ask police officers who are out on the street, what resources do you need to improve your profession, your job? What is it that's out there that how can we improve the processes that are going on? And you think about things like PERF and these other organizations where we've got police officers 3 times removed coming in and weighing in on what's happening on the street now. It's a problem. When I was going through my university program, we had one of the foremost experts on gangs in the country. She had her PhD. She'd done probably hundreds of peer-reviewed journal articles. She testified before Congress. The policy had been changed because of what she had said. She had never in her life met a real gang member. Never. So how do you?
How's she an expert?
How are you an expert other than the fact that you have some letters after your name?
I know the answer.
Because you have some letters after your name.
She's an expert the same way that Ray Gunn was an expert in breakdancing at the Olympics.
Yeah.
He had read all the books. She had the degree.
Mm-hmm.
She did doctoral research on breakdancing, and therefore must be qualified to go to the Olympics and breakdance.
That's crazy.
That's the level of insanity, right? Now, here's the thing. I will tell you guys a dirty little secret. Just because you haven't done the job doesn't mean you can't manage people who do the job.
Well, 100.
Right.
I agree. And
this
it doesn't
is a management principle that people don't understand. Sometimes the people that know how to do the job shouldn't be the managers. And sometimes the managers aren't the best people in the field at the job, but they do understand the job at a different level, right? Which is what you're talking about. You can understand that emotional and that personal and that human intelligence and not be a hard charger, and you'll get promoted, right? Because people realize you're a neck up kind of a person. We should put you in a place where you can make some decisions. Doesn't mean you're the best cop in the world, but you might be a pretty good supervisor.
The question is, are you serving the profession or are you serving yourself?
That's the question. Well, I was going to say, therein lies the big caveat to that, right?
They're serving themselves.
Well, I know guys that they were not the best street cops, but they're damn good supervisors.
Sure.
And because as a street cop, they were trying. They had like you're saying, they were there for their partners. They were there for the team, right? And so I had supervisors that would take one for the team anytime. And then I had supervisors that would throw anybody else under the bus so long as it made their team look good.
Yeah.
So now when you speak about this subject, what is it that you think we need more of?
100%.
That's a good question.
Priority list.
The first thing is we've got to have the ability to learn from our outcomes. And currently there's a couple of things that stunt our growth in that regard. First is the way that we approach outcomes. And the way that we approach it's a blame-oriented approach. Essentially, imagine someone gets into an officer-involved shooting, just to use kind of the highest level. And we come in and we say, here's your card. Go call your attorney, go call your rep. You're going to be criminally and administratively investigated. So right off the bat, that's our starting point for learning about this outcome, right? And then we're going to do a criminal and administrative investigation. In fact, that's the only investigations we're going to do into that. Well, right off the bat,
and you're not going to be involved.
Right. You're not going to be involved. We're gonna pull you out. We're gonna send you home. We're gonna isolate you from your job, from your friends. We're gonna take away your weapon. Yeah, I know we give them a new weapon, but we're gonna take away their weapon. We're gonna send them home. The first thing we understand from PTSD is that PTSD isn't necessarily a function of how traumatic an event was. It's more a function of how much control you felt you had over that event. And so if we wanted to, and it's most officers don't experience PTSD when they get involved in a shooting, but if we wanted to do everything we could to increase the likelihood for it, we wouldn't do anything differently, right? So that's the first thing. We treat
I was going to say a lot of the PTSD we do experience as cops comes more from our aftercare or lack thereof than it does from the actual incident.
And saying aftercare is generous. The way we treat officers after they've been involved in these events is horrendous. Especially given the fact that they have put their lives on the line, doing most of the time exactly what we've asked them to do. It's horrendous. And then we put them through this process in which there's a risk that they may be criminally prosecuted, they may lose their home, they may lose their family. It's horrible what we do to people that are defenders of our communities and go out and do the job. And I'm not talking about people that go out and do wrong intentionally. I'm talking about people that go out and make the best decision they can in the moment. And this is their reward. Then, as an organization, we do nothing to learn. Let's just think about what it is that we do. We basically say that officer might be the problem. And if that officer is determined to be the problem, we're going to remove the officer and the problem goes away. And so essentially, as an organization and as a profession, we don't have to look at the systems that created that problem. Medicine takes a very different approach. If a nurse administers medication that results in an adverse outcome, right? We don't start by blaming the nurse. We start by trying to understand the process, because what we know is that somebody in a similar position is going to come along with similar circumstances. They're going to do very similar things and they're going to produce a similar outcome. And if we don't address the systemic issues, then you never improve the profession. And so the way that we look at outcomes has stunted our growth, has stunted our ability to improve officer safety and community safety. And so that's one thing. The other thing is proprietary training. Everybody owns their own training for law enforcement, and we bring in an outside agency to teach us how to do the job. We don't, there's not a lot of oversight over that. Nobody shares information. Everybody keeps
we learned that
very, very close, right? They don't want to even share the videos from their presentation. They're going to come in, they're going to tell you how to do the job. And it's very boxed and it's very, very formatted. And it's a horrible way for professional education to take place. And then all of our technology companies do the same thing. They tell us how to train with their tools. And then we don't do anything as a profession to go beyond that. Most agencies, let's say, and I'll just use Axon as an example, will take a taser. They'll look at the minimum training standards. They'll put their officer through that. And then they do no additional training above and beyond that. And from my perspective,
100%.
that's asinine, right? It comes out in the outcomes that we see. We see officers not understanding the capabilities of the tools they're using, putting themselves in positions they wouldn't otherwise put themselves into, not realizing that the tool has a high rate of failure in the field. It doesn't mean the tool doesn't work great, but a high rate of failure in the field. And we end up driving poor outcomes, both for officers and for the people that they're serving, because we haven't taken a systemic look at how to improve those outcomes. And so that's a small caption, and then we could get into training, right? Yeah. 6 months of training is nowhere near long enough to prepare an officer to go out and do the job that it is that they do.
You need ongoing training.
Well, so I have I'll tag up on this, because what you're saying about looking at events, right, and understanding, like I think of the AMA, right, the American Medical Association, coming together and providing standardized guidelines and the standards of care, things that the medical profession has put in place, that are ethical standards that are nationwide, right?
Yeah,
we don't have that for law enforcement.
Well, I feel like we kind of need that for law enforcement, but people get too wrapped around the axle line and they're like, Well, National Police Academy, and like, no, that's not what I'm saying. We need a standard,
national standards,
a national standard, so that everybody can be held accountable. Right. Everybody be receiving similar training. That way, when you have, like, let's say an active shooter, and I mean, we've all seen the school shootings. We've seen cops
national standards
fucking act. If you had a national standard that could show, hey, this is how we handle,
it would be post.
Yeah,
right.
Well, and not just a national standard, but ongoing training. And it 100%. Needs to be, and people hate this. I'm going to say something that you can push back if you want to, but it needs to be, the onus needs to be put on the individual officer to maintain their certification through training, right? When we say that it's the department's responsibility to train me and bring me up to speed and make sure I have all the training, it allows people to just sit back and not do anything to improve themselves professionally. Almost every other profession, including nursing, the legal profession, all these, in order to maintain your license, you have to get a certain amount of training every year. And if you put that back on officers to do that, and you mandated what type of training would be appropriate to continue to keep your license, you would see a very different attitude towards training and towards professional development.
Well, the only pushback I have on that, and this is a very small one, is that a lot of agencies get very busy, and they tell their officers, hey, you have to get your shit in for this month. Let's say pursuit policy. You have the end of this month to make sure that you take the post class on it online, and it's X amount of hours and get it done. But you don't have the time to get it done, and we're not going to pay you overtime.
Yeah,
I think that there should be something in there that allows officers on their time off. And I'm not saying a bunch of money. Couple hours on your day off to go in. We're going to pay you $100, $150, whatever it is, for a couple hours, time and a half. Get it done. Come back, show us the completion. We'll cut you the overtime check and just be done with it. We're not saying you're going to be able to milk it, but you're going to allow these officers to be able to do it on their time off, because trying to do it when you're working takes you out of the field, takes you out of the fight. And that's not what we need as law enforcement. So
I've got a radical idea, but I've had this for a while. I've never really kind of sussed out how, but it solves a lot of what you're both talking about. And one of the things that it started with was burnout, right? You're a cop, you see a bunch of shit, you get burned out, right? And you don't have time to recover, right? It's not built in. You're always trying to put vacation days here, vacation days there, time off here, time off there, whatever.
Yep.
I think that my solution for all of this is you do 11 months on, and then a mandatory month off. And during that month, you do nothing but training.
Yeah.
And it could be a sort of mini academy reunion where all the guys from your academy class that are still employed and haven't gotten fired for banging a dispatcher or drinking, on duty or something. You guys have a little mini academy reunion, and you spend 4 weeks bonding again, having doing some PT, doing some training, learning the latest skills, right? And then you get your month off, but you're still working. You work 5 hours a day, or 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, doing academy shit, doing training, doing some intense stuff, and then go back to the street for another 11 months and know that in 11 months, I'm going to step back. I'm going to get a breather. I'm going to do some training. It becomes this cycle that you can wrap your mind with.
I love it, Tom. You find me in there's probably 3 agencies in the country that have the staffing levels that would support that.
To mandate it. We have
Chicago, NY, and LA.
But if you had to, right? Yeah. Because all these smaller agencies, they have regional academies. But those regional academies.
We look at Denver; they're almost 30 to 40% down on staffing.
That's
we gotta get
right. Everybody's down on staffing. We got to get those are rookie numbers. We got to bust up those numbers.
Yeah. But really quick, I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to go back to what you said about the AMA. Medicine had a kind of a keystone moment in the 90s. They had a task force that went out and looked at medicine, and they found doctors kill hundreds of thousands of unarmed people every year, right? Yeah. Orders of magnitude far more than law enforcement do. So they actually pulled together a presidential task force in the 90s called the Task Force for 21st Century Medicine, right? So sound familiar? That it was very similar. Yeah. So they brought in all these experts to talk about why are doctors killing people? And is this due to medical error? These are people that aren't going to die anyway. And you know what the name of the report that task force produced was? The name of the report, it's a hardcover book. You can get it. The name of the report is To Err is Human. To Err is Human. And essentially what they found, the first 2 chapters of that, right? they're conservative numbers where doctors kill in the United States 93,000 people a year due to error. And their finding was if we don't give them legislative protection to do their review process so doctors don't feel threatened by that review process, we don't learn anything. And the whole idea is that we have to learn, or otherwise we don't improve the profession. The profession dies. And so medicine took a very different track than law enforcement did with the 21st century policing task force that we had. And we've gone the opposite way. We've said we've just got to watch police officers closer. We're going to put body cameras on them. We're going to tell them do better, and we're going to punish people who don't get it right. And where has that gotten us? Look at the states that have the most severe police legislation: California, Washington State, Oregon, Colorado. All of those things, all of that legislation was put in place because of a shooting or an in custody death. Have we reduced shootings or in custody death with any of that legislation?
Made the streets less safe.
In all of those states, crime has gone up, officer-involved shootings have gone up, and policing has gone down. That is, we have fewer officers on the street. That's the result of taking a closer look and punishing officers after the fact. Until we start taking an approach like medicine, we're not going to get better. And I will give 100%. You the little bow to put on top of that, because I can prove to you that we know how to do it as law enforcement professionals. At least one agency knows how to do it. And the proof is the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. And if you, I know that sounds weird because that's a big agency. They don't do anything right. Well, let me tell you something. I know somebody who flies for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. I also happen to know that their policy about the aircraft is a lot different than their policy about the patrol car. Policy about the patrol car at most agencies is if you ding it, you're going to get in trouble. You're going to get dinged. Yeah. You're either going to get a turd in your jacket or you're going to get a day on the beach. You know, you ding a car and it's your fault. You're going to spend a day off, right? Or at least, right? Maybe a turd in your jacket if you're lucky. Well, there's no incentive to report damage to police cars, right? 100%.
However, at LA County Sheriff's Aero Bureau, not reporting damage to a helicopter kills people.
Yeah.
And so their policy is, we don't give a shit how it got there.
Yeah.
If your aircraft is dinged, you have to report it. You won't take discipline for reporting it.
Yeah.
We understand dings happen, but they understood that not disciplining the pilots and the air crews for dings on the helicopter was going to, in the long run, keep the helicopters running properly and save lives.
Tom, that is accountability. If your officers don't have the ability to give account, you're not an accountable organization. And you're not a learning organization.
Correct.
And what you just described is true accountability. And that's the only way that you improve the profession. And if you truly want better outcomes in law enforcement, you got to approach it differently. You can't come with a blame-oriented culpability approach to undesirable outcomes in law enforcement.
Yep. You got to take that mindset and you got to expand it.
100%. If you want transparency in law enforcement, there has to be transparent in your own agency to know that if we come forward and to let you know, like, hey, this is what happened, that we're not going to be in trouble. Yeah. I mean, you're going to have so much more, your morale is going to be better. Everything's going to be better because these cops know, like, hey, if I get a fucking ding on my shit or I almost set it on fire because I put the wrong jumper cables on when the battery died.
That's not a true story, Chuck.
No, not at all. You're not going to be held accountable. Like you're going to be held accountable, but you're not going to be. We're not going
to sacrifice you on the altar of dry.
100%. 100%. Procedural justice is a big buzz term. We want our cops to be procedurally just. Well, then you have to have a procedurally just organization that treats them fairly when they're involved in a process. It has to be transparent for them, and you have to give them the ability to give account. And if you don't, if you are going to punish them for any bad outcome that comes along, you're not transparent, you're not accountable, and you're not a learning organization.
We need a national version of POBAR and a national version of POST or the AMA for cops. Paul, we didn't even get to any of your like street stories. I know you've got stories, right? You worked at a college. There's party stories. You worked at Riverside County Sheriff. There's meth head stories. There's plenty. I mean, we didn't even get to that stuff because we had so much fun talking about one of my favorite topics, which is what's wrong with law enforcement and how we can fix it.
Well, I'd love to talk some more. I feel like we could talk for a couple more hours, Jen.
Let's have you back on the show. Now let's before we get to it, let's start with, you do have a dedication, and we want to make sure we don't skip that before we give you time to promote your stuff. I'm
a pure civilian now, Tom, and one of the things that I end my classes with is just a thank you to all those who are out there still serving, still choosing to put on the badge, still choosing to go out and put themselves in harm's way. I know two people who are personal friends of mine who were shot and killed in 2 separate active shooter events. And I don't know any other profession in the world where you can say that you know 2 people that have been shot and killed in 2 separate active shooter events. And the first one was an academy mate of mine, Mike Crane. He worked for the Riverside Police Department. He was a detective at the time, was shot and killed by Dorner, the LAPD officer who went rogue. He sacrificed his life trying to respond to Dorner's first shooting event. And then, if it's okay, I'd also like to just point out Eric Talley. Eric Talley was a Boulder police officer. He was a good man. He was a man that I had an opportunity to meet his family. I had an opportunity to respond to calls with him. And he was that man. He was running into gunfire to protect his community at the King Supers in Boulder, Colorado, when he was also shot and killed. They're heroes. And all of your listeners who are out there who continue to do this job despite the pressure that public has put on them, despite the pressure the media has put on them, despite the vocal minority who are out there who don't like law enforcement, they continue to do the job. And I just want to thank them and thank you for what you guys are doing.
Well, rest easy, brothers. We got it from here. And yes, thank you to all the people that are out there listening.
100%.
I want to give Paul a chance to tell people where they can find him and his work, your podcast, all of that kind of stuff. Where do people find New View? It's the New View Police Podcast. Is that what it's called?
Yeah. New View Police Podcast. It's based on a new way of kind of looking at law enforcement, accountability, looking at law enforcement in general. It's at newviewpolice.com. Also, I'm the founder of the Association of Force Investigators. Really, it's a group of people that come together, whether you're experts or you work in the realm where you investigate use of force events. It's a kind of a
think tank
opportunity to come together and discuss these cases, to start to learn about human factors, the impact human factors have. We bring on speakers from all over the country, even people I disagree with, we bring in, just because if they have something important to say about use of force, we want to have those perspectives there and have those conversations. And then if you're interested in my research or the podcast, you can just go to paultaylorphd.com and pull all of that up as well.
Oh, wow.
Well, that's awesome. It's good to know. And I will, as soon as we're off the air, I'll tell you who we interviewed, because you may know him, you may not. I don't know. I'm just curious because what you were talking about unregulated police training and having people on that you disagree with.
Yeah. Sounds good. Hey, gentlemen, I really appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to talk.
No, we're happy to. We'd love to return the favor anytime. If you want, if you ever want us to come and just be dumb on your show, we're happy to do that. I can pretend I'm smart with the best of them. So
yeah, well, you're good at it, Tom. I can tell.
That's what my grandfather used to say. If you can't dazzle them with your brilliance, you baffle them with your bullshit. So,
absolutely.
What do you got for us, Chuck?
Well, I want to say thank you, Paul Taylor, for coming on today, or Dr. Taylor. Thank you all today for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow us on our Instagram at @war_stories_official and our Facebook at War Stories Podcast. If you're already following us, we'd really appreciate it if you could share our posts and help spread the word. You can also check out the link in our bio on both platforms to find all of our social media, the media links, and the website. Our podcast is available on all major streaming platforms, including YouTube. If you'd like to support us, head over to our website at www.warstoriesofficial.com and grab some gear. Do you have a story to tell, or you know someone who does? We're always looking for law enforcement, corrections officers, dispatchers, firefighters, medics, and veterans, but also those ER nurses and ER doctors, because we know you guys got some great stories. If you're interested, email us at booking.warstories@gmail.com and share your story. We'd love to have you on. If you know someone who'd be a great fit, please send them our way. Thanks again for all the support. Stay safe.
Chuck, I have to have you add something to your little rundown that we don't say and we need to say, but I don't want to say it because I just hate even hearing myself say it right now. But click the like and subscribe right down there. Since we're on YouTube.
Oh yeah, hit the bells, the link, the notifications, all that funny mumbo jumbo. Yeah,
I hate even saying that, but I know we have.
I don't know where it is. It's up here. It's down
producers-
here. It's to the side.
Here, there. It's
Yeah, I'll add it.
click that like and subscribe somewhere.
Also, check us
yes.
out on TikTok.
Yeah, and remember, it's Dr. Taylor to you unwashed masses,
Just Paul,
but it's Paul to me. So you guys can stick that in your pipe and smoke it. I got to call him Paul. And until our next episode, come home with your shield or on it.